god, keeping up with that silent movie bit is a killer on the throat. Hey everyone, I'm Ben, your underground conductor. Welcome to Underground Cinema. At time of recording, we are currently at the beginning of October, which means Halloween season. So for the entire month, I'll be talking about exclusively horror films. And what better way to get us started than with a classic, the 1928 silent film The Man Who Laughs, which, as of 2024, is technically in the public domain, which means I can legally do whatever I want with this movie. If I want to record my own commentary on this film and then post it in full with all the footage, I could. The only reason I won't is because that sounds really hard and I don't want to do that much work. Now, when I initially decided to review this film, I had a difficult time trying to figure out how to classify it and even if I should consider it to be underground. While I'm sure many film buffs and cinephiles know and love this film, it's pretty much a certainty that probably most people have not heard about this movie. The fact of the matter is that most silent films just are not remembered today, and you can understand why. Most people around today don't really go out to watch older movies in general, let alone movies this old. And when it comes to silent films, specifically, you're unlikely to see them unless it's part of like a history class or film course. I would say that most of the silent films that are remembered today are probably the German expressionist films like Nosferatu, Metropolis, or Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, or American comedies like Modern Times, City Lights, The Kid, or pretty much any movie made by Charlie Chaplin. That being said, while The Man Who Laughs certainly isn't as popular as those movies, I would argue that it should be considered an all-time classic simply based on how influential this film really is. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, The Man Who Laughs is a horror romance film that is probably best remembered for this picture of the main character, Gwynplaine, played by actor Conrad Veidt. Now, if you looked at that picture and thought to yourself, wow, that guy kind of looks like the Joker. Well, you got it backwards. The Joker looks like this guy. You see, the creators of Batman, Bob Kane and Bill Finger, both agreed, along with Jerry Robinson, that the character of the Joker, specifically his appearance, was inspired by Conrad Veidt's makeup for The Man Who Laughs, which means that the Joker as a character would not exist in the way we know him now without this movie. So whoever your favorite version of the Joker is, whether it be the comic version, or Cesar Romero, or Jack Nicholson, or Mark Hamill, or Heath Ledger, or Joaquin Phoenix, or not Jared Leto, none of those versions of the character would exist without Conrad Veidt's portrayal of this character. So think about that. The fact that the most iconic comic book villain of all time owes his existence to this movie. It's kind of remarkable. Side note, Jared Leto is actually an extremely good actor who's been in several amazing films, such as Requiem for a Dream, Panic Room, and Blade Runner 2049. He just wasn't good as the Joker, which is fine. Sometimes actors don't do a good job with the role they're given. It happens. The influence of The Man Who Laughs doesn't stop there either. Apparently, the distributors of this film, Universal, were so impressed by both the visual aesthetic and the makeup of this film that they not only adopted the same gothic tones and architecture for a lot of their later monster movies, but they actually got the makeup artist for this movie, Jack Pierce, to come in and do the makeup for a lot of their iconic monsters, including Frankenstein. And it's actually funny because a lot of the Universal horror monsters, including Frankenstein, later went on to inspire various other comic book characters. I won't get into that here, but the Angry Video Game Nerd has a great video on his channel, Cinemassacre, breaking down this exact topic, discussing the similarities between comic book characters and horror characters, so I recommend checking that out. I'll leave a link in the description for the video. Suffice to say, The Man Who Laughs is a very influential film. But does it being influential make it good? Well, no, it doesn't make it good. It being a well-written story with a compelling character makes it good. The plot of The Man Who Laughs is that you essentially have the character of Gwynplaine, who is mutilated as a child to give him a permanent grin on his face. The actual makeup for his character makes him look like he has a rictus grin, but it is apparently supposed to be carved in. The reason he is mutilated like this is as a way to insult his father, Lord Clancharlie, a nobleman who actively spoke against the King James II. James II, along with his jester Barkilphedro, who's very much a conniving little creep in the same vein as like Littlefinger or Wormtongue, condemn Lord Clancharlie to death by putting him in an Iron Maiden, which in the movie they call an Iron Victorian lady. I don't know why they call her that, but I assume it's because the actual case looks like a pregnant woman, which I think is kind of funny, because she wouldn't be a maiden if she was pregnant. Shortly after the death of Lord Clancharlie, King James II puts forth a decree to banish all of the comprachicos. Apparently the term comprachicos was actually coined by Victor Hugo, who wrote the book For the Man Who Laughs. The comprachicos in the film are an ethnic group that specialize in mutilating children to make them look like clowns or jesters, and a Comprachico surgeon named Dr. Hardquanone is the one who actually mutilated Gwynplaine. As the Comprachicos are sailing off, they actually abandon Gwynplaine, leaving him to die out in the snow. Gwynplaine, who is 10 years old at this point, wanders around for a while until he comes across a woman holding a baby. The woman herself has frozen to death, but the baby appears to be still alive. Gwynplaine keeps wandering until he comes to the house of a man named Ursus, the philosopher. Ursus invites Gwynplaine and the baby to live with him and his dog Homo, and Ursus discovers the baby that Gwynplaine saved has gone blind, presumably from the cold that she was out in with her mother. Side note, the dog Homo is actually named after a Latin phrase, homo homino lupus, which roughly translates to man is wolf. So, isn't that fun? Years pass by, and Gwynplaine and the baby both grow up. The baby's name is Dee, and both Dee and Gwynplaine work as performers for Ursus's traveling stage show. As they travel around, Gwynplaine in the circus is often referred to as the Laughing Man. They travel to a fair called the Southwark Fair, and that's where we reacquaint ourselves with Dr. Hardquanonne. Dr. Hardquanonne recognizes Gwynplaine and then sends a letter to Duchess Josiana, who is currently the acting noblewoman of Gwynplaine's family castle. Josiana is a bit of a promiscuous woman, and she's very bored by everything in her life, as many rich people are, including her first fiancé, Lord Dearymore. The note is intercepted by the former jester Barkilphedro, who has now become an advisor to Queen Anne, and he uses this information to increase his own political station. Queen Anne is not a fan of Duchess Josiana, and upon hearing this information, she demands proof. That way she can essentially put Josiana in her place at court. Meanwhile, Josiana herself engages in a lot of promiscuous activity, ironically at the Southwark Fair, and that is where she comes into contact with Gwynplaine. She is both intrigued and disgusted by him when she first sees him, and so invites him over to the castle. Now, Gwynplaine's character is in love with the character of Dee. He's hesitant to do this, but Dee is blind. Gwynplaine is insecure that the only reason Dee loves him is because Dee can't see his face the way other people can, because everyone who looks at him just laughs at him. So he takes the hint and he goes to visit Josiana. During his visit, Josiana actually receives a letter from the Queen saying that she is to marry Gwynplaine to retain her political station. And upon reading the letter, she laughs out of shock. Gwynplaine takes it as she is laughing at him, and he chooses to leave because of his insecurity. He goes back to the fair, but is then taken by the emissaries of the Queen. Ursus and Dee are then banished from England, and Gwynplaine is risen up to a state of a nobleman. But at the end of the film, Gwynplaine finally stands up for himself. As all these noblemen are laughing at him, and as he is being forced to marry someone that he's not in love, he scorns the court, he scorns Queen Anne, and he decides to go reunite with Dee. We get this amazing final chase sequence throughout the streets of England. We get this hilarious gifable moments that you can send to your buddy on Discord next time you're bored. And the film ends with them sailing off into the sunset in love. Now, this film is great. Just like any great silent film, the movie moves at a brisk pace and is very easily understood because they didn't have sound at the time, they didn't have dialogue, all they had were dialogue cards. You had to make information delivery efficient. But the performances are also really good. Mary Philbin, who plays Dee, perfectly embodies this sort of supportive but confused lover who desperately tries to offer Gwynplaine a sense of affirmation to soften his insecurity. Something else about the character of Dee which I found interesting is that her role as like this blind love interest sort of mirrors the character of Alicia Masters, who in Marvel Comics is the girlfriend of the Fantastic Four member The Thing. Since Alicia's character is blind, she can look past all the physical deformities and just love what's underneath. I guess that's just another tie-in between horror movies and in comics for you. Another thing about Mary Philbin, which I found interesting, is that probably her most iconic role was as the character Christine from Phantom of the Opera 1925 with Lon Chaney. So I guess she was just typecasted as the love interest for monster characters. And Conrad Veidt is spectacular in this film. Apparently, Veidt plays a couple roles in this film. In addition to playing Gwynplaine, he also plays Gwynplaine's father, Lord Clancharlie, which is just a testament to his talent. His performance sticks out so much, which is kind of remarkable considering that he couldn't move his mouth for this movie. Apparently, to get the permanent grin effect on his face, Jack Pierce had built a custom set of dentures with hooks at the end to keep his mouth wide open, so he couldn't really speak during a lot of the shooting. So most of the acting is done either with his body or his eyes, and he just emotes so well in this movie. You perfectly understand that this is a figure who just feels tortured and insecure because of his facial mutilation. Conrad Veidt just sells it. And as a side note, Conrad Veidt, apparently just a class act all around. Not only is he an icon of the horror genre, appearing in such films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari as the character Cesar, but apparently in real life, despite being a German-born actor, he was an outspoken critic of the Nazi Party and even fled from Germany with his Jewish wife when the Nazis took power. Apparently later in his career, when he immigrated to the United States, he elected to play several different German or Nazi characters in movies as a way to discredit the Nazi Party. Probably his most notable role as one of these villains would be the character of Major Strausser in Casablanca. So yeah, Conrad Veidt, not only amazing in this film, but apparently amazing in real life. Side note, something that I really love about the fair scenes is that you get to see all like these classic oddities that they used to card out at traveling shows. And reading through the signs of some of them, it's so funny that they describe like one creature that's majestic and has apparently like the face of a child, and it's just a lion because they didn't know what a lion was. And it sort of goes along with this idea that a lot of the mythical creatures that we hear about in old stories were just inspired by real life animals that people saw while they were traveling abroad. Like, oh my god, I saw this thing that had the body of a horse and the neck of a snake. It's like, that's a giraffe. Apparently, one of the oddities in the film is also a five-legged bull, which they never show on screen, but if you ask me, the fifth leg, probably a penis. Just guessing. Just guessing. I do have some questions about the timeline for this movie, because the film opens up in the year 1690 when James II was king, which is historically accurate, by the way. And when it fast forwards, his daughter, Queen Anne, is the one who rules England. Also historically accurate. However, what I'm left to question is the ages of the characters. So typically when it comes to a situation like this, you go off the ages of the actual actors in the film. Conrad Veidt was 35 when this film came out, and Mary Philbin was 26, which is accurate to the actual age difference between the characters, which is about 10 years. However, if you use basic math and assume those ages, that means that the bulk of the movie takes place in 1715 and Queen Anne died in 1714. I know that's a minor thing, and you can just say, okay, just scale it back a little, maybe the movie takes place in 1713 or 1714. But then you have the dog, Homo, who is in the beginning segment of the film in 1690, but also is a consistent character throughout the story in the later years. So assuming that this film does take place in the 1710s, that would mean that that dog is minimum 20 years old, which is kind of remarkable. Small thing, but I just wanted to bring that up. I mean, I guess you could just say that it's the same breed of dog and they named it the same thing because sometimes owners of dogs do that, but aside from that, though, I don't really have any major complaints about this movie. It's really solid. I mean, I know some people would probably say that the romance between Gwynplaine and Dee is kind of weird since they grew up as adopted siblings, but I think that's a pretty common trope in fiction. You see that in a lot of stuff. I mean, they do that in the TV show Dexter. They also do that in the CW show The Flash with Barry and Iris. Like, I don't really see that as a big deal. I mean, everyone's favorite 90s movie is Clueless, and siblings getting together. That's pretty much the plot of that movie. I mean, if I was going to make any small critiques, it would be that the B plot with Josiana and the noblemen feels kind of like it gets dropped by the end of the movie, and that Dee's character could have a more profound role in the story, but that's really stretching it. Funny thing, I know the Joker isn't supposed to have an origin story, but if this was his origin story, I don't think people would be disappointed. At the end of the day, this is a film that is about an incredibly insecure man who doesn't think that anyone will ever truly love him, that they'll just laugh at him because of his deformity. But then he has to sort of learn to overcome that and even reject a social advancement that comes his way. Because Gwynplaine in the movie is literally given a lordship in recognition of his inheritance. But that doesn't matter to him because he isn't going to be allowed to marry the woman he actually loves, and because all of his noble peers laugh at him. Overall, while Gwynplaine is certainly a tragic character, he is ultimately a character who prospers in spite of his disability. He learns to overcome his insecurity and finally accept Dee's love without question. And I think, as a character arc goes, that's pretty inspiring. So yeah, that is my review of The Man Who Laughs. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe if you're feeling generous. You can also follow me on my Instagram or Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes. And I will see you later. Oh, feels good to be back in color. It's a funny thing. I wanted to bring this up as like a final gotcha moment for anyone who still questioned that the Joker was based on The Man Who Laughs. Aside from the fact that there was a comic book released in 2005 literally called The Man Who Laughs about the Joker, there's also, the actual comic imagery. I mean, look at the back of my jacket, for God's sake. See? If that doesn't look just like Gwynplaine, I don't know what does.